그래서 그게 니체도 그래서 개발치도 주름 소야기 되고 쉬운데 아디네 자델이야 네 류리야 아는 아주기 주름 소야기 발셔도 어디가 류라 차비기 차바디 아니 바시 차고레스 제사다 류라 차비기 차바 봐야려 아니 데레님 poten지 돼 봐야라 근데는 안디게 생각을 버렸는데 빼로지 차바 류레 차바 김루미 빼로지 가르쳐 버려라나 아주 류디 다들 아주 류디를 빼 소소라랑 게 쉬우지 약보 쉬우 요기는 줘야 매되긴 지딱과 땜부러 진진에 안델라신 되네 도시는 차지 안에 아주 류디 송두거래서 제사당 아주 도시 삼다베나 아주 류디 되네게 지게 다버템부 가야 말에 님이 가서 시내 봐 안지 칼류다 샘 카진 봐줘도 하는 아주 류디 안 자결라서 봐게 아니 대봐 아니 지 사회기 돈달 파티한 투대 제파 제네 사용도 내가 저 델리아 어dangi 류신 델리아는 자신이가 기금도 와서 지난마게 완자 니나신 내가 류디를 다들 시고 자신 제제네 류디를 송고해서 가요 말이에요. 지난디네자 류다 셈니 아니 뭐 저도 매바 찍마레스 권이에는 찍님이 지모 타대바치 타대바레 타대레 님이 카테는 조그레 대인자 아니야 지류들이야 자신 제화요 말해서 어두신 빼지는 게 생기네 쉬러.
Good evening. So last week, having just completed the part of the chapter which was looking at the first of the three types of ethics, that of refraining from misdeeds, we started to look at the second, ethically accumulating virtuous qualities. And this continues to verse 83. The first section, about half of the section, is about abandoning attachment to the cause not to train in ethics, namely attachment to this body. So last week, we started to look at the fault of being attached to the body. In particular, that we relate to it as if it is unchanging, whereas the reality is it changes momentarily. We looked at that when our inevitable death comes. This body that we have been so attached to throughout this life, then it will be no different than food for wild animals. It will be just suitable to be discarded and given to vultures. And at that time, whilst one imagines vultures ripping it apart, we'd have no attachment for that flesh. So why do we regard it as so precious now? Why do we hold it as something of such value, or with such attachment? So this was to challenge this grasping at permanence in relation to our body.
니네는 다들만 주셔야 아주 류리야 안에 미장와 류디 미장와레스 온도시는 자신 제와 해야 말했으네 니네기 돈마 디슈해레.
Last time we were looking at this misconception of grasping at something that is impermanent as being permanent, and now we come to look at that which is actually unclean, that we consider to be clean.
나 지금 디레다 몽베 이교 지칠 신수 장마 송매제 미장 초규 출월디 룰워 송대 지시송스.
Then the 61st verse in the 5th chapter. Confused, ignorant mind, for what reason do you not take on a clean wooden sculpture? This machine, which is a collection of impurities, what is the point in protecting this filth?
부이다고 시우지 신신제들이야 차화기거로와 되네자다 되네기 류신바디 몽비기 원기 지고래제를 몽바세데 랑랑이 다다도 주바지 랑세데 나세데다 나도 규단 견신지를 되는 주바래데 딩아도 마신바지 강라 마되바 랑공원의 주바 나세데 랑공 강라에 마되바 랑공원의 주바 유병나지 되네기 된지보 몽바 마리바지 해시 뭐지 다 되네 기증도 되네 아주 류들 메데 네 류세네 네 류세는 다 류들에 다겨 진 거래서 네 류센지 제자도 네 류진도 네 류데다 배지 인주어도에 매 템보 배 템보다 배지 약고 휴지 나와 지나도 봐 나신 약고 휴지에 섬 진제 안델르랑 류리아 아니 어디 차네 온도스 지고래 에세지 어떤 보디서 몽바 이세야디 도나디레 몽바 이케세야디 디스고다 몽바 이케세.
This verse, as mentioned, it builds on what we have been looking at previously. So in the verse immediately before, we spoke about how we hold to this body as being mine. We grasp at the body as being mine and therefore are so attached, or rather, due to being so attached that we hold it as mine. So the first line here, confused, ignorant mind. So this is referring to this mind, our mind being confused and therefore ignorant about the body itself, grasping at it as if it is independent, something that we have control over, power over, like an owner towards, whereas in fact, it is just something that has come about independence on causes. But we don't relate to it in this way. And this is because of our confused ignorance, because of not relating to it through a correct understanding, we have such strong attachment.
데네 싱거레스 리틀 데네 차신 제제네 자외긴도 싱기도 와스 엔자나 아주 데네 류아주 데네 그런 게 다게 아주 네 류제서 다게 제 류디 달리 미상화 차되어 레제를 다 미상화레스 지난 딜레 장화디 신기 쇠셰비기 미 수로 신기 쇠셰바디 땅마레스 지난 결혼에 데네 신기 쇠비기 쇠비 수미 수 데네기 수신이 수텔이야 결장마텔이야 아니 네 숙선 다기 지금도 와서 가르친 지금 맞지 지칠 신숙 장마 숙미제세도 제상 가르치는 결혼 데네기 신기 숙장마디 네 류레스는 다기를 가진 지금 말했어 이제는 지금 와서 풍부들의 신기 류제 장마래 돼 결혼 다기 친 지도 와서 풍부의 미상화를 시해야지.
Moreover, so now linking from the first to the second line, confused, ignorant mind, for what reason do you not take on a clean wooden sculpture? Here, we relate to this body as if it were independent, something that we are the owner of, we have control or power over, rather than something that has come about independent on causes. Moreover, we relate to it as if it is something clean, whereas with a little bit of reflection, we recognize that it's not. So the question then that is being posed is, well, then why if you want to have something that you hold to as mine, why don't you take something that is clean, like a wooden sculpture, rather than this filthy body?
아니 신기 숙사마 다르게 미 송미자 가르친 다게 송마 디손의 지기로 봐 결한디 녜류레선 디 녜류레 삼제도션 다게 진의 지기로 와 지기면 와서 되는 송도 제가 내내 송와자 당주 도신의 시코란테 삼단디 뒤던다들 시소라 삼마담사 디 최메기 기시로 고야니야도 디 류서성 류레 다게 지가 마스서 류레 자디 신기 수디 결한 녜류레 다게 전 지기로 와서야지 삼시 송요도 당연히 톱도 가 삼다베네 디 제메로 치러와다 랑기 류디 랑기 베지 다여도와다 제자데 녜류신 다게 전에 제쳐야 책으로 그래서 랑기 류디 랑기 베지 다 신기 류디 안에 수디 쇠셰게디 베지 다시아마 갈라사 와서네 네 신기 쇠셰게 신의 세현의 라바디야 야마야 갈라서야다 내가 말와 생각도 류디 내가 리그로 제가 대장도 류디 다게 제나 제 초바도시다 신규리 다게 제네 지기로 와서야 돼 대안에 반도 민도 와서 별내 잡초셔로지 내내야지 두왕에서 삼단하다 어떻게라 삼단하다 제라시라게 니가 메디어로지 통해도
relating to this body as if you have control over it, ownership over it, well then wouldn't it be better to rather to take on a clean human form carved from wood rather than this body that is so filthy. So this then is challenging the way that we innately relate to this body as if we own it, possess it. And if this really were the case, then why don't we take something that is at least clean?
아니 풍보디 라나 저와 가야 메디 풍보디 아니 네 풍보레스진 진바이나 현차체베네 딜레 신규수 장마디 아니 네 풍보레스 현차샤네 지기도 와스 그래서 니니가 직바로 왔다 풍보 강나디나 결혼 섬다는 나디나 저와 메디게 제어 제메기 진바디 직바 차되로 와서지 디니시 고고르다 그래서 다 삼노다나데 삼노다나데랑 나세 진요도 베데 나세디 강라에 모두 랑원이 주버 진바나시 nga gale denike gala ma rangwen de juba jue de ba ina ta nga da phungpo ni de jeme dwen shen wa jawa me de wa ji san xin yu su sui ji xin yu su zang ma de dang nga yin jeme dwen shen ba ji ba cha de wa da de wa ji san da jeme dwen xin gi rang nga da jeme dwen shen gi phungpo an de rang phungpo de ne nge lu de da zu song ba de xin gi lu de nge lu de da zu na ya ga de ti zung min do as ka san nge lu xin gi lu de zang ma de ni 풍보디 자와 말했어야지. 어두스 송거라. 니네 삼당이도 고 된다 침묵과에도 차고래.
Shantideva is actually getting to a really important point here. So that confused ignorance grasps at the self as being self-existent. In other words, it exists by way of its own nature or essence, which means the self does not require the aggregates, the body and mind. The self is something separate, distinct from the body and mind. So this then is also linking to the previous verse, the 60th verse. So if this is the case, then you, because Shantideva is addressing himself, you, O mind, if the self is something that is self-existent and therefore does not depend on the aggregates because it's self-existent, but rather the self owns or possesses the aggregates, then rather than possessing such poor quality aggregates, why don't you take something better? Why don't you take a clean human form carved from wood? So this then is the deep meaning that's being got to here, that if the self does exist in the way that we innately believe it does, that it is self-existent, exists by way of its own essence or nature, and it is therefore not dependent on the aggregates, but controls the body and mind, is the owner of the body and mind, then why don't you rather take control over or ownership of something better, like a carved figurine?
어디네 자다 아니 데니게 가는데 풍보디 미장와래서 미장 초기 출거디 루바송디 지시롱스 안주 풍보디 미장와래서 진짜 미장와래 미장위게 초 망보 미장와 망보지 쇠기 출거나시래 미장의 뇌래 미장와 사사게 뇌로래 아니 미장와 쇠긴게 출거나시래 제자데 안데네 자데니게 풍보디리아 데니게 풍보디 루바래 니 판마도 시칼라마서 루바 판마도 루바래 제자디 델야 안에 지 요시오지 안에 제바 진제 안지게 송고야 가미노 와서 가르친 송고야 가미노 와서 다던다라.
The third and fourth line. This machine, which is a collection of impurities, what is the point in protecting this filth? So this body that we relate to as if it is clean or pure, relating to it in this mistaken way. When we look just a little beneath the surface, we recognize that actually it's quite filthy, impure, unclean. And moreover, it's not just about the filth, it's the basis upon which illness and pain arise. So what is the point then in protecting such a body?
지게 남사 나초쇼 철라조쇼쇼 차디어레스 안지장 안주 류디 귤래야 미장 미장 완료된 깨바레스 제자다 레다 녀모모가 깨려봐 지게바 귤라티네 시바레스 다 류코롱 오 초에 디야 저게 사야동야 칼라 사야다 추동야 데니진의 초고고레스 류 초야리야 제자 류디 배규와균에 줘야면 다버 템부 야고치 말레스 그래서 그 규와 조초초를 지상 칼라나 추다 되게 산을 초고 거래스 되네 사고 거래스 되네 사용도 안가래 칼라마 수분나 마친여도 되네 닝바자 칼라나마 아니 수분나 차네 아니 집에 닝바자 리루 거래스 지상된 진바다 조바다 되네 즉 차다 나다 되네게 류발라서 망고도신 수분나도 끼인 거래 지상도 수분이 조금만 수고를 때 칼라자샤산 대시 장원做不用了的的宁白什么有人清白的做不当人做不了的做不把就有了而且上逐步可能我可能来有可能没掌握了的就啊有毛病举行的结果安可那边听来呀安错一个是这个的那个啥告诉的的那个谁了的呢安这个错也超过的那些上的安数不拿嘛些的嘛亲的的你管咱们那真做不成的那个就出口那些做不水做不差的嘛做不拿了呀安的嘛真嘛去了嘛都是做不水出口那些的现在的数不的对什么人能这么开用的现在对数是呢图是呢拿着大家的给我这些给的呢拿去的给我这些的现在给的那个数不的讲的等到了两个来对话巧就是今天是按照数不的被就是小伙上当班呢拿去有我做去被这做不水给做不虐做去嘛都被小不到不要不去审查呀去开好嘛的现在今天上当班那个是绿的呀去被要不的俺是上当了与老婆就被给我主要那每天被要不一般经过上了当晚那些短到了点的上大班的渔民多啊，没办法，人家那个绿的里啊，恰现去的送过来给民多啊，是我的继续说是。
What's by looking at this body as recognizing the impurities of the body, that this body is a basis of filth. The purpose of this is to challenge our exaggeration, the exaggeration that comes from our attachment to our body, to try and get us to see our body in a more realistic light rather than in this distorted way that this distorted, unrealistic way that we relate to our body. So when we think of the human body, we certainly can recognize on one level that it is a remarkably efficient machine in that it takes in fuel. That fuel is consumed and creating energy for movement and other functions. And then the waste of that from that fuel is then expelled. So from this perspective, is a remarkably efficient machine. However, we relate to this body in this particularly distorted way, not recognizing that what is beneath the surface are a variety of fluids and solids that, if we were to see them, are quite unpleasant. And if we do not wash and scent the body, very quickly it starts to a stench from the body arises. And this is not because it's a rotting corpse. This is it's in its prime of our life. It still emits a stench. And when we think of the various fluids that come from the various orifices of the body as well as the excrement. None of these do we see as polite or as desirable when they leave the body. But the reality is all of them have been produced and are abiding inside the body, just beneath the surface, waiting to be expelled. So that filth that we are a bit embarrassed about, we don't want others to see it on our body or coming from our body, it's all there, just below the surface, waiting to be expelled. So hearing this, it's not meant to be particularly appealing, but the purpose is to push us to get a more realistic, a balanced view of this body, so as to overcome the exaggeration that comes with our attachment for it. And also, a second approach is to recognize that this very body is the basis upon which we experience so much pain and so much illness. So it's not this marvelous thing to parade, to display, and to have pride in. That is a completely confused and ignorant approach. Here then, we try and get a more balanced, realistic approach, view of the body.
Yada dengan susubu di majuwe na lamsa chakwa chaya na nitima kaya mini sune ya jiki kawar mikya la gura dine tuya chu tuya nogun ma na nogun ma nabdu tuya zogo tuya kane luba tuya kade yase majuwe na kane ba dima kaya so para lo zogo chaya ane dine ki ane amcho na le zogo chaya yorwa andu sine anzu ludi le dine ki jetang anzu ludi le pe je nanglo samdaba ne dine 지금 저거다 인규마도 디나라 차사디 저거야 들어다 또 신의 삼단에 제사당한테 류디 또 신의 삼단은 나주 삼나려 류디 배 직장마다 야고슈 유어줘면 야고슈시 짜지 뭐 휴지에디 된다 삼반나신 된다 오만 삼단에 나주 류디를 인고 하요 말해서 왔다 배지 미자위기 저버스 여행이 추고를 나신 저버 루세기 당은 저기 Jasper Nashi that did Denigi, Direshimato, Shandy Kayan Inboyo Maras, and Inboyoma, the Zusam, Tembo that you are in them, Zangmashu, Sosugi, Chashin Gegi, Chawakeo, Chawada Shen, Chashin Geo, you Maris or that. Ye Maris, Chashin Geo, you Maris, and to the Chashin Gedi go, the Chashin Geo, you go to Maris, some donna, the initiate in it, Chashin Geo, young Baras or them. That he and the Lumiza in some data, Shung that day. This
attachment we have for our body, we display it, we beautify it, we have it looking at its very best, and we feel quite proud. Yet, we constantly are trying to hide the fluids that are excreted out of our eyes, out of our nose, out of our mouth, out of our ears, let alone from what we then cover with clothing in terms of urine and excrement, so that can't be displayed or smelt in any way. And this is when our body is in good health. When we're ill, or we have a wound, and if we have a wound and then we have other fluids oozing from the body, this is hideous. No one wants to see this. Or if we are sick, and then the fluids that come from our body, now they maybe change color, they smell more. When you think about the body in a realistic way, it really is quite revolting. We're walking around with this sack of garbage that is covered by skin and held together and is shaped by the bones, and we are so attached to it. Such an unrealistic view we have of this body.
Dine some dangores. Jesa dine some mata che, Anzuki Nawan Bay, Yahore, some the Chashan Chidubena, Chata Gigres, Chapa Gigres, and Sosulula, never does in Juna, and the Corner Langres, never Corner Langres, and dig in the Lulich, Chapa, Dine Agaje, Dine Corner, and the Anzuki, Lugu Dundalia, and the Gidina, Che Madame, Lu Sungup Dundala, and the Doge Gidina di Beja Dugres. Says Dine is on the church of Balocop. barshi chagore lule chaba chisa deni redo ada ngajugi lulu koya dulo kugore ane kangpalo koya hango kugore onso kugore dulo mira kugore ane shamu kolo koya shamu kugore andi ngaji legalera mangche de ngaju garasane ta lu nesege desa kangpa kugore yagoji desege den yago gore den yamen zubul ne ngura chesa di de ne yoya ga kangpa gore chesa di chesa zubu sungkyop chele doa sudanda chagro 아직 되는 망고 유카지를 망고 되는 수불을 강한 체제야 파서 참여 줘고도 수불 많이 내 제사다 수불 많이 돼 참여 줘야다 파서 도시는 줘야 돼 사야 돈다 내가 망은 제로 지금 저기 유니버시티 망치 수불을 배제다 말도 메이팅에서 차기도 되네 삼다 제사 되네기 도시는 수불을 차신 게 되나 안 도시 차신 수비기 소수 류리 꽤인데 마통 봐나 차신 기그레스 차신 개바이나 이기네 차바다 콘로제를 되자다 나게다 아니지 도시는 디 된다래야 아니지 내가 강중 된다 내가 제지는 최정이 말해 최저 고프라고 말해서 제가 니네 장아주 류기 아주 나수네지 요 말에 도시는 삼단 류기 꽤인데 파 삼단은 된지 그 류디 꽤인지 하고 그래서 돼
When one is attached to something, it is very likely that anger will follow. So when we attach to our body, because of our attachment to the body, our anger easily arises. And this can come about for ridiculous things, such as people just pointing out things which are quite obvious, that about the imperfections of the body. But because of our attachment to our body, we take what they say in an unpleasant way, and we get upset, we get angry, even if what they're saying is true. Moreover, we have to put so much time and energy into looking after this body, which then serves as an obstacle to having free time and mental space to engage in the Dharma. For example, we go to work to earn a salary. Majority of the salary goes to looking after our body. How so? Well, if you think of the mortgage you pay for your house, why do you need a house? Why can't you just live outside? This body needs protection from the elements. We also need clothes depending on the time of year. And then because of attachment, we like a variety of clothes. And we also need various lotions and other things to look after the body and to scent the body. And we pay for our health. We pay to exercise. All of this costs money. A vast proportion of our salary goes to maintaining this body. So this is one fault, is the amount of time and energy that it takes to maintaining this body, food and so forth. Then the attachment to it. And from the attachment, anger comes. When someone points out that your hair's not so nice or your weight's not so good, anger then comes. Pride too. If the body, you're quite happy with how it's looking, then pride arises. All of this comes from this attachment to our body.
다고 때 매바 미자외 라신제 아니 지기 미자외게 뇌로다 되네기 아니 지게디나 나셔저 쇼쇼쇼로지 되네게 통용도 어때 류디레 아주게 규 아니 지게 규를 삼다베나 아니 지게 미자외 규레 되네 주와 묘모바 규레 되네 주와자 도시네 되네수 사하고요 되네 아주 류디 차바 두지기 동안 이바세데 하고 거래 진짜 디 안주기 동안 하고 거래 니한테 세부하고 거 디세탑리랑 저기 다 면주제하다 되네 탑시 망보던 거로 디세 가라가서 세세 두고 봐 제자다 차바 뒤지게 유에 동안 세대 가브리랑 저 하고 두고 돼 대지 되원나다 강아 쳐야지 뒤스고 세상한 저 류디 차바 뒤지 동안 임바팅 저기 삼고랑 마당 완산 뒤나 하고 뒤야 갈래 가셔 차요 두치는 삼다된 랑글리 오다 둥아 라신라 레도와 다 빼지나서 캬바 뒤지기 둥아레 루이 둥아레에서 송거다 오늘라 레도와 선배게 두시는 해바 템버리 녀도 다데 내게 루이데 캬바 뒤지기 둥아 임바디 하고 두고 그래. 제자다 저기 둥아의 라신 임바디 또 하고 그래.
When you think about sufferings of samsara, one of the approaches is to reflect on the threefold division of suffering. The suffering of physical and mental pain, the suffering of transient happiness, and the suffering of all-pervasive conditioning. In terms of this body, it's very easy to see how it fits into that first category, the suffering of physical and mental pain. So this is quite clear. And to develop a sense of disenchantment and a determination to gain a different body, it arises quite easily. To abandon these contaminated aggregates, there is quite clear to see in terms of that first type of suffering, that are the physical and mental pain. But the more skillful approach is to recognize that this body is actually an illustration of the third type of suffering, the suffering of all-pervasive conditionality. Which is that this body is the basis upon which suffering arises. In other words, it's because of having such a body that we experience physical pain, illness, degeneration, and so forth. And the reason for that is the causes that have led to this body. So when we reflect well also on the causes that led to this body which is an illustration of the suffering of all-pervasive conditionality, this then enables our mind to turn to give rise to a wish for liberation.
And 지상다 레다 녀모 옹의 주의 풍보들의 미 네 캬바두지 동아세 레다 녀모 옹의 주의 풍보들의 캬바두지 동아라고 하래. 니 레다 녀모 주 풍보들다 냐와를 깨나 레다 풍보들 레다 녀모 주의 깨와라. 다 밀미다 하를 깨바나 레다 녀모 주 풍보들다 레다 녀모 풍보. 다 수던 수면에 레다 녀모 주 풍보들다 풍보들 지상 캬바두지 동아세 레다 녀모 주 풍보들 감숨 가가라 차상에 캬도 예대 그래서 냐와 되발에 요래 아니 술에 요래 수메래 요래스 지자 레다 녀모주 풍보디디 코와를 끼와 레 끼와 렌치질라 풍보들 레다 녀모 끼와 렌바데 데 동아래 디 캬바세데 캬바 뒤지에 동아라고 하지 가르서네고 아니 감수물이야 참도 예대 봐서 캬바 뒤 동아스 당아도 동아유 동아세야 되가 되발마도 수도 수메래 동아유 동아디 요 말에 강바나야다 라바나 나스타데 디디 용고 말이야 지자 콘들이야 동아유 동아디게 메래 되냐나 숙숙다 수메래 동안이 동아세 요 말에 할라사고 요 말에 할라사네는 로도도세 카고모도세다 로나기도세 되니기 동아디게 지게 요 말와 수부주고야 되니기 제사다 안주게 되니기 애다 녀모 풍보디다 감수 레는 끼와 수련배나 레는 끼와는 가서 차상을 위해 봐서다 캬바서 차상을 캬도요 그래서 캬바주지 동아세 디시 오래
This third type of suffering, the all-pervasive suffering of conditionality. So this, as mentioned, this refers to this body that has come about independent on contaminated karma and their afflictions. And the body of every being in the desire realm has come about in this way, whether in the three lower realms or in the high realms of humans and gods. Every being born in every desire realm being has a body that has come about independent on contaminated karma and the afflictions. But also those beings born in the form and formless realms, they too have also come about independent on contaminated karma and afflictions. So this is the reason why this term, in the term all-pervasive suffering of conditionality, that is the meaning of the term all-pervasive. The entirety of samsara is pervaded by the results that have come about independent on contaminated karma and the afflictions. For us, many beings who are born in the desire realm, this body is also a basis for the the suffering of physical and mental pain, that first type of suffering. The beings born in the form and formless realm don't suffer from that type of suffering, but all beings have come about, all beings in the three realms of samsara have come about independence on contaminated karma and afflictions. And therefore, their form is an illustration of all pervasive suffering of conditionality.
Shikor Tambo Korean, Tambo Dunga Shepherd Chas, Manukunjo Pomar Chas, and Gobon de Chas, Lam Gombar Chas, one. Jesus only the Dunga Shepherd Chas, the Dunga, Dunga Dunga, Dunga Chaba to Dunga Sum, Tina and so that the Hako, Tina so the Chaba to Dunga, the Hako Shepherd Chas, and the Nisu Kanish Chaba doing in body, Hago, Wache or a shingle rest, Tambody, Simanga Banya Warriors, this Simanga Banya son, then the you could do the Ganesias and Pachevachores, Julia Javachores, or Ducian Javachin, the Gudi Pankores, and Gorwa.
When the founder Buddha, when he taught of Varanasi and taught the Four Noble Truths, he taught the truths of suffering, of origin, of cessation and path. And the first, the truth of suffering, he taught is to be known. And whilst the varying presentations on suffering all need to be known, it's the third that is most important, that of all pervasive suffering of conditionality. And the reason it is the most important, and again, all the different presentations on suffering, whether the 3, the 6, or the 8, they all need to be known. But this is the most important one to come to recognize, the all-pervasive suffering of conditionality, because it's the origins of that, the causes of that need to be abandoned. So when one thinks of the origin of suffering, that second noble truth, one is talking about contaminated karma and afflictions. And this is what leads to us being born in psychic existence without any control.
On the nigger, some night that reading in Bomeba, and it Misavi Ranshi, Misavi Nue, and the Nigimba, how going to that the Nig Ludi that Chashin Chavaki Goma, that Lingbo Mindu did the Yakumindu Sempegi, that the Yakumindu Sempegi, and then Chavaki Maran, Jalaine, the Yakumindu Samdi did Devaki Gomare, Nakalach, Yakumindu desired Devaki Mido, me and I meet Yakumindu some the middle Javaje, Devaki Mido, on Dinashi. To get in the Ludile, Guen of the Niki Guengi, and then Guen told you about she would you had a tongue, or that Lulia, Chapakigom, or that Ludi the Imbo Mindu Pando, she wouldn't Minuade, it's the Ludilla, the Tahodas, then Ludi the Guminus and some legal, but that Luli tried to get some legal.
So the purpose of this reflection is to gain an accurate understanding of the body, accurate in the sense of in accordance with reality, to get away from this distortion that comes with attachment, to recognize that this body has no essence worth being attached to. So what is one attached to? There is no essence or value that, or essence that one is attached, worthy of being attached to. It's just like if there's someone that you dislike, this person is full of faults, you will not be attached to that person. Likewise, by recognizing the reality of the situation of this body, one will have a realistic view of it, and therefore will not be attached to it.
가르 야고치 여르베 뿌이다고치 여르베선 괜 탐제데 루지 여르베선 여르해서 올다 이거레스나 산지 유구수디레서 산지 유구수디 괜 탐제단 잡아레스 제가 산지 유구수디 유체네 아니 지 개화바실레 되는 개화바실레 되는 주바치레스 다 오해 전에 안 될야 아니 지게 나제 세라바 사과요 말 세사과요 말 세사 먹어서 세 먹어서 류리아 아니 류닝바차 류 Bene Kasore, Anzoina, Genia Church, Gango Charo Yorwa, Nasanyi Kuzula, Denishomar, Gango Chayomar, Gaia Yomar, Naya Yomar, Chiwa said, Denish Yungo Mare. Cesa, and the Sanyi, Nayanzu Pazo Joel, Louis Joel, Chick, Zigbi Gashan, Zigbala Tor, Draw Matubata, and the Childrovene, Yangomba Kaleja draw, and the Moderna draw, and the Bruna draw, Mado, Shen draw to Emerwa, Sanji, Nu Gululia, and Denigi, Yomares. Chesa Denisa, the two Kempa, Kempa, Ishi, Samba, Mitara Ligores. Chesa Denisa, Sanji, Kuyan Hamjeta, Sanji Ku, Sanji Kusu. Chesada, Denigi, Yende, the Temba, and se rakwa le tue mo go ba ani gawa da na wa na chi wi kyun tham che dan ja ba yu nyomo ba tham che dan de wi ge mo lam ge wa ba shi le tin tu ju ken an di gi lu gi de le du de na ani gang do phe bai na tho re gang yan me ba tho ba de re ba gang yan me ba ani yi shi khen ba de gawa khen ba zam yi an da ra khen ba ne tho ba da sanji gu gu di jo da tho ba de rek ba me ba ma zu zhuo de zig ba zhu zig bi tho de ro ba an ji de pa ga de zhuo de sanji gu le de ne shan de mo ko qian ba zhen bi sam lo de ge tu qian ba gao yu na da ra yi gu di le yong ro ba zhuo de ji san sanji yu gu zu da sanji yu ye xie mo ye me ro ji gu zu mo ye me ji san de ne ge da di an sem jing ye xian de zhu ba la ye chou de ge bu gu de le la ba me re 제가 되네자다 되네게 초도기 보고디 안 되네시 요레스 제가 당한테 되네고디 토고 거래 루이디 되네시 토고 거래서 올다 유디 유 레다 녀모 주어 말에 개와 바실레 되네 중화래 제 유디 당한테 루서야라 칼라사고도 칼세라바 사고도 상기 루레 되네스라바 사고요 말에 제래 아주 류디 내 gengo 차는 바 닝바 차로 해줘 봐. 상이 굴러진데 요 말해야지. 도스네 라바차 내 류를 좀 봐야做바차. 그 세라바 삼아서做바차做回류에 차도 요 말해야지. 다 봐서 배도 토바다 레바 요 말해야지. 아니 되게 상이 구디 아니 셴리야 셴인기 야 최된 발이야. 아니 저게 풀루친 발에 초도 규발에서 감당 몇 봐. 간에시 소소게 자님 되버네 되게 잘 두고 그래야지. 제사 산지 구유인데 나되게 나디나 신다 찬소보 숨리 배지서 뭐 기주세야 돼. 뭐 혹시 연대 뭐 혹시 여러봐다 되네 주투야 그래. 되게 한 산지 제사다 되네 구유 수 되게 안주 류디를 캐버드 법을 수주 요레스 다 제사다 안주 류디 미자외 뇌 견탐제 견유 초대 바진사 델레 차고디 타고 델레 빵고디도 거에 델레 차고도 델레 자제 류디니 스톱고 선비 삼러시 오래지다
This meditation thus far has been focusing on us gaining a more realistic view of our body, so as to challenge this exaggeration that comes with attachment, that even just from this brief description, we recognize that the way that we hold this body as something to be flaunted, something to be proud of, is really silly. So through this meditation, one comes to a more realistic view of the body. But then also there's a very positive view that should be drawn to, cultivated in the mind, which is by recognizing that this body is really not worthy of being attached to. So there's a rejection of being attached to this body. Then one lifts one's focus, lifts one's gaze to the kind of body that would be ideal to have. A body that is not pervaded by faults, that is so limited in how it can be of benefit to others. And that is the Rupakaya, the form bodies of a Buddha. These are entirely different from what we've had to endure thus far. And the great difference comes about between the bodies of a Buddha and the bodies of non-Buddhas is because of the difference in causes. Our bodies come about in dependence on contaminated karma and afflictions. The body of a Buddha has come about in dependence on pure karma, on faultless causes, pure causes. So therefore, a body of a Buddha is completely different to ours. So the body of a Buddha and the mind of a Buddha are indivisible, which means wherever the mind of the Buddha is, the body is there. Which means the Buddha can appear anywhere. Moreover, the Buddha can appear in any form. So we can travel around quite freely in our modern world, but we nevertheless have many limitations. We can either walk, we can run a little bit, or we can fly or drive. And kind of, that's it. A Buddha doesn't have that obstacle. If there's a need, the Buddha can appear there. Moreover, the Buddha can appear there in the form that would be of greatest benefit. We do not have that capacity either. This is the body we have. We appear, we travel, and we appear in this body. A Buddha is not limited like that. Moreover, the Buddha's body does not need fuel. It does not need fuel like we do, like to eat and to drink. It also does not need medical care. It does not suffer due to birth, aging, sickness, and death like ours does. It does not smell. It does not suffer from fatigue. It is not hindered by physical obstacles like we can't, a wall will stop us. So the Buddha's body, because of the radically different causes it comes from, is radically different from ours. And it is an ideal vessel to be of benefit to others.
Bendigo toyege dondala sem sanji ko bon topna deni kudi top tu go cheza deni sang sanji ko bon top deni ki kudi top de topala sanji ko bon top go cheza ngi sanji ko bon tobi chirdo ani jiki gewa gewe nyamlen da jimba tsunim la soba deni ki gewe nyamna karana sosugi majeba nam manyela sosugi lam gewa majeba de pa gebar cheya ta 게 차와 소소규로 여디에 기회 냠는데 여바디 양고요 권력권도 펴와지 그 당기 인생배 땅는 냠는 지기 인생배기다 두시는 삼는 게 오래서 올다.
Thinking like this then serves to encourage us further to strive to become a Buddha, to attain Buddhahood. And to do so, it serves then to strengthen our determination to accumulate virtue. To accumulate virtue through the two means of strengthening the virtuous habituations that we are already habituated to, and those that we aren't habituated to, those virtuous ways of thinking which we haven't yet developed familiarity with, build those familiarities, that habituation.
Rang dadu zhiba jing, dine dadu zhiba jingba di wangi ngay lu se nga zu lu liya, ane chige dagi jing, delay lu liya, ane chige cha pe yun me baro samdang che, ane liya cha pa ki do shiri, dine nga zu lu du sungo re, di dada tigo ma res, di no chu res, che zada nga zu samba na xin lu di don la, gani shio res, lu di pe, che na cho cho, yuwa cho cho, pen geji gengo cha yuwa cho, den naya dang, naya chiya dang la sopa, deni ge ane mizangwa la sopa, chugu nyo, deni ge yun, ponsong yun ki cho de chi cha de res, jeza deni zang, deni res, du sin samdang gu res, jeza da yun ki sopa za dele ya, ane chakshin ki ne sunggo ma res, sungya chi ya sunggo, chakshin ki ne sunggo ya ma res, jeza da dele karchi wasan, da deni ge sam, yun ki ponsong sopa, yun yun ba da du, dele da 탈고도 디디 고야면 될균연의 라신지 레샤 세상 될 탈고도 선배 삼는 게여도 내는 가르쳐 와서는 다 될 초도 요 리토베데 가르서는 상기고 진짜 상기고 토고 선배 된 얘기도 깨고래서 되는 기도네 게여도 되는 상기고 토베 치도 개회 자와랴 냠년제네 언도시는 거 공부도 당고 그래서 언도시는 송거를 되는 님보디
The summary then of the meaning of this verse is that from grasping at this body as being from grasping at the self as being self-existent, we grasp the body as being mine, as something that belongs to the self-existent self. And from that, attachment arises. An attachment that you could say, we almost view this body as flawless, in that our way of relating to it is so exaggerated, is so out of balance, you could say we relate to it as if it was magnificent. And when we look more realistically, we know this is not the case. Look beneath the surface, and we recognize that all these waste products are gathered together, just waiting to be excreted. Moreover, this body is in a process of constant flux. We relate to it, as discussed last week, as if it is stable, but it is not at all. We are constantly balanced precariously on a precipice, in that our situation can radically change, and it can radically change at any moment. We have no idea really what's happening underneath, if there are causes coming about to lead to a sudden, unwanted change. So thinking like this serves to push us to a more realistic view, away from this distorted view that comes from attachment, which comes from self-grasping. Then we lift our mind up. Having come to recognize the limitations of this body, we give rise to the wish to gain a faultless body, the faultless body of a Buddha, and thereby reaffirm our commitment to strive to cultivate the causes that lead to Buddhahood.
안 송급 제국을 해주고 제국 말선 디벨레벤다 이 송급 제국을 해서 그러다 제국으로 하다 맞은 정말 받아 제자다 제가 봐지 송급 제상데 군론 마서나 나보 군론데 제자 대시 소야디 류디两个 류디래 배지게 딱바 템부 교주에면 배 약부 푼순 소발에 삼다제 되네 제바修제선 이제 차다 제제 삼로 군론 되는 시기에 류디래 송급 제바이나 되는 안 주게 대자 공정하게 녀모바 아니 되네기 마무 기고레스 제자 류리아 안균 마타지 류들에 탈되게 코알에 탈되게 삼바기도 말디 되네 타는 군노토네 안 류들이야 순교제요 말해송으로 순교제요 말 아는 그 순교제로 세대 오다 류디 균 되는시 풍선 되네기 균나 된바 미자을 류들에데 이나다가 상지 대상지 고보 토구도 제자 상지 고보 토발라 냠는 제발라 띵다딩아 줄리딘 딜레 사바지 요마레스 제자 제자다 되니게 랑 코로나 되니 이내다 내가 프린리야가 냠는 제발라 띵딜라마 띵바 냠는 제 매바자다 제자 류디 탕부 매바다 내바다 탕부 매나 아는 게 냠는 제 두마레 제자 제상에 냠는 제발라 류디 탕부다 대부 축고도 on denege samde samje tamjigedo sanyo ko tobi chirdo and den chebajendi ne dendi and den del tutu nyamna garchinda den tutu wa chi ye den de le 제가 dene ensam nyamnen jebala and den de tangboda yagoch mena and nyamne chitu mare di inza ngedi an denege don달야 소소게 세다 and kalaso tu luisung gyopjeada jegoya chi chagowa jegol denege jeare kunno denege jewa 안제자다 랑기 류데오다 탕보지면에 셴리에 로봇 제베네 제도 말에 셴리에 로봇의 판도 제베나 랑기 류디 데보다 탕보지 고거레스 제자 디네자 라니기 안에 심지어 탐지기 산조고 뭐 토요주 냠렌지야다 셴리야 안에 판도 류에게 디 된다라 류디 안에 데보다 탕보 약보지 고거레스 어두시는 송유지야 안디 마세 체델이야 산조고 뭐 토마토에나 체마온바네야 딘디로지 류 베능안송에 텔레 직 제송바나 데네 아니 냠내제 고갑도에메 샹리아 로봇이나 제투 류기 전 로봇 제투야 갈래가고 차고 디에자 모바네 양의 딘 개발전 다디 딘 밀리디 디나시 톱제 지단고 라신 딘이 세데 이내야 냠내제기 딘디 디야슈처 제선 디인자 메심자들 산요고 보토베 토베 쳐도 샹리아 판도 주야라 딘 모바네 딘 딘이 톱고도 셈비기 도치나 삼다제 아니 마오번 딘딘이 요야 돈달라 주름소야다 진배 냠는 제야 안다디네야 아주 류들이야 아니지 도시는 송교제야데 군농 데니기 토네 아니 군농나제 송교 류디 다 송교제네 지고 그래서 월다 제야 주름송고레스 말이 진주린 진바서버 저레스 제 남준시에 경원 요거만 규디래다디 디승냠는 제고고라다.
Here it's good though to repeat what you would have heard before, just to make it very clear. There is this further extreme that we need to guard our mind from going, because it's all too easy that when one looks at the body and gains a more realistic view of it, recognizing all these fluids and unclean substances just beneath the surface, that we can have a mind rejecting the body. And here we can go to an extreme again and not see this body as something that we should be caring for, and rather ignore the needs of the body. So this is a further extreme that one can go to. We need to guard against that. So what has been addressed thus far has all been about changing the way we think about our body. It's about changing our mental way of perceiving our body mentally, so as to affect our motivation. Because we really look after our body because we want to be praised, we want others to praise us, we want to feel confident. Reasons like that, reasons which are all tied to this one life. Reasons which have nothing to do with benefiting others, attaining liberation, attaining Buddhahood. The real reason, even if it's dressed up in certain ways, the real reason is because we want to feel confident, we want to be praised, we want to be liked. These aren't the motivations of the Dharma. So we need to gain this more realistic view, as has been presented thus far. And then I spoke about you recognize that the Buddhas have perfect bodies that can be of great use to others. That is the kind of motivation then to generate. So that's been presented. With such a motivation, you then look at this body that you have right now, recognize it for what it is, a great vessel by which or within which we can accumulate extensive virtue. And for this purpose, I'm going to look after this body. For this purpose, I'm going to ensure that I eat healthily and I eat the right amount, that I exercise, but not too much. I exercise what is required and I look after this body. Why? Because I want to gain freedom from suffering, freedom from having a body that is an illustration of the all-pervasive suffering of conditionality. And it's not only me that wants to be freed of such suffering, so too do all beings. Every being wants to have a body that has come about independent on pure causes. Therefore, I must strive to become a Buddha so that I can lead all beings to attain a state freed of suffering, to attain a body that is not subject to the sufferings of birth, aging, sickness, and death. There's not a basis for ill health and pain. So, to guide all beings to attain such a state, I have to become a Buddha. To become a Buddha, I need to take care of this body. But I only need to take care of my body for that reason. My primary focus needs to be ensuring my ongoing spiritual development. Part of my ongoing spiritual development is that I need to ensure that in my next life, I have another excellent body. As I do in this life, when you think across the various realms of samsara, this is the best basis. Therefore, I have to create the causes to attain a further excellent rebirth: ethics, generosity, patience, joyous perseverance. I need to accumulate those causes so that I have another excellent rebirth, and by engaging in particular causes, I have a rebirth with good health and so forth. So therefore, when one first gains a realistic view of the body, then one looks to attaining a body of a Buddha, a body that is not subject to suffering. Recognizing that to do so, to become a Buddha, I need to gain freedom from suffering, the same wish that all beings do. So therefore, I become a Buddha for the sake of others. This then becomes the motivation to look after our body so that we have a long and healthy life. Moreover, I also need to create the causes to ensure that I have an excellent body in my next life, ethics and so forth.
소소랑 모델디기 교인도 뭐 통화하는 게 모델 배 약부인 삼담 배 약부인 뿌이다고 약부 유 선배 삼담 되면은 때 모델 사번 유에게 되냐기 뒤버디 킹 말와 네 계시나 모델의 닝바라샤 아데 게디나 교인 쇼데 칼레 쇼도 다다디 모델들이 약부 민도 선배 삼담 돼 motor shanda sabu nyu sembe sabu nyu to ni tikirwa jesa da motor sabu nyu le ngui sa horwa da sa hodi da jesa da ngui sa lega do phasu do du motor ning be de beje ma da ra da wa di dang de da sab shin be sta ro da sab shin ji ngui sabu nyu gi motor nyu ngui de sa ma da ba do ne motor ning be de pa sab shin ne sab che de jön sho ba na yang jing pa so ge dang ge chin du chin pa beje da jesa ya bu da bu gyap che and 가르스네 고 사바 뉴욕에 돈달 디 탑람 돈달 베지던 거와 마도 콜 약을 빼부이다래 가자네 베지던 거 말지다 디 베지 두스 베지다 안디 고파 무이디 파 뉴욕에 사바데 뉴욕에서데 바 유샤로 와데 고다데 판 유샤다로 온 베디나지로 와다가 공부들 유엔로 통고요 베네 그래서 산지고 고파나 지금도 파비고 와마도 봐도 류디 다보야 마geb나 냠는 제고 그러고 말 제사디 냠는 야고 제게 돈디 돈달이야 뭐 류디 손급 제고 그래서지 배도 차고로
Make an analogy. If you're driving around in a car, quite happy, going from here to there, not really aware of actually this is quite an old banger that I'm driving around in, you won't have any thought about upgrading your car. But if you take a realistic look and think, actually, it's a little smelly in here, it's not so reliable, it was some years ago, but now it's not so much anymore, then thought will come to, I wonder if I could get something else. And then you look around and see, actually, there is something else that I could get, just I don't have enough saved up in the merit bank just yet. So I need to create many more causes. So you now have a mission. I'm going to work and save money so that I can buy a newer model. But that doesn't mean you just discard your old banger and then walk to work. No, you'll still put it to good use and you'll take care of it. Plaster it together so that it can see you through until you've saved up created the causes you need, saved up, and then you can buy the new car at last. It's the same here. We need to have a realistic look at this vessel that we are abiding in, recognize it for what it is, see it as the imperfect vehicle that it really is, remove these tainted sunglasses that make us exaggerate this body to us, and then also recognize what is possible, that a form body of a Buddha is possible. But I must make use of what I have now, put it to excellent use, so as to fill up my merit bank, so that I can continue on this journey lifetime after lifetime until that merit bank is completely full, then arise as a Buddha.
Yeah. Adene anjulula ningbo meba andusino gomgore ningbo meba ta gore shere. Adene da ta de sungor din ma. Tomar babe rimbadi rangi lui tade che. Shayang rubi jawale sherab tsungi gudu ches.
And Shantideva presents two verses looking at how this body really has no real essence. So the 62nd verse. First, mentally divide the layers of skin, separating them. Then divide and separate the flesh from the skeletal frame with the scalpel of wisdom.
Baba dile samda, jiza baba dile tu sene re cho cho da, gyun sho sho sho, nime chana ci cho cho, bene denegi ne dang cho cho ma de chi kabro zu na na za dang cho cho cha ro baba de ningbo me de sin baba chi yo re se je re. Toma baba rimba de. Dene baba o la, ane gar jo sene当时略太的切是的爸爸当下当如果当安的那个车上爬爬要我切活的是要我切活切的是的但是我这个怕见的切我切的要切嘛但略太的现在比如说让略安的怕心就切让个略怕他的切活的是感觉切活真的宝贝我了开始有下药的是实际上下的呀安的把这个车老做安的卷小安的了呀 추다 룽게 장샤바 추로 감선은 샤 감부 차도에게 에너지 룽다 추된 되니게 도시 되니 샤 리쇼쇼도 샤 되네리 안디 월 루고로체 루고 리바 아니 리바 루고 되네디 강베 강바 루고 라베 루고 아니 지티바 짐바 파 예와라 체도 오체네 예와 체 짐바디기 되네 제가 루고를 차 다디나로를 가려래 인간적인 인다 로아다 유마다 조바 이 조바 차상진한테 수리를 봐 안 되네 자다 되니기 누체네 차상 되네지게 르에 타대제 셰야 르바 자와레 셰럽 천유 구두 셰시데 제가 셰럽기 심바 셰럽네 나도 유튜브는 봐 천나진데 셰럽기 봐 제바체 도체네 봐 예와치 도체네 체네 도 심지체 거래서 되네게 체네 심지체 따야도 인보 예현지에 통하여 말씀 인보 여바 대대 야고 유어된 윤회라면 다바 템부 유배 부이다버려서 이내냐요 말해서 영어요 말해서 통하여 말 도신 제가 도신 토마 바베 림바디 랑기 르 타대 체스的 바반 마샤 바바다 샤다 루고다 나 차다 진바다 조바다 유마다 유 파디 부두신의 예와체 오레스 예와체 네 타대지 대단 샤다 루고다 자와레 아니 진이 천이도 고디 바이와 체도 되네 닝보 예화지요 말해서 통해야지
Looking at the entire 62nd verse here we guided in a meditation, so it's we're very clear it's an entire mental process where we start with the outer limit of the body, outer perimeter, the flesh, and we move layer by layer right down into the very body itself, seeing that the body covered by our skin is so vulnerable. We are not, there's the skin. It doesn't take much for pain to be experienced. A small amount of heat, something sharp or rough, and immediately pain or discomfort can be felt. Then we go down. We've got various layers of skin and beneath that flesh, and then we've got many of the fluids, blood and so forth, flowing within. So now we're moving through the whole verse together. We're dividing deeper, and we come then to all the organs and the various bones that are that make up the skeleton of the body. And we go through this whole mental process, looking at the body, and we see with this sword of wisdom, or the scalpel of wisdom, that no matter where I'm looking, from the surface to the various essential organs within the body, or even in the very depths somewhere of the body, can I find an essence that makes this body exist in the way that I have believed it does. We saw last week, we relate to the body as if it's unchanging, permanent. There's no essence that indicates that this body is unchanging, even though we relate to it in that way. Likewise, in terms of our attachment, we find no essence of the body that makes this body worthwhile of believing it to be desirable, a basis for attachment. There's no essence that is a basis for any of these confused ignorances that relate to the body as being unchanging or a basis for attachment. Nowhere can we find, with the scalpel of wisdom, any such essence.
오늘 인마 디지바르다 르바 남장 예체네 관계 바도 다샤신 딜레니보 지지 지예제 다니기니 답을기세데.
The companion verse, the 63rd verse, then separating the various bones, look right down into the very marrow and asking, what essence is there to be found here? Examine the nature of the eye itself.
언데지 담보 치지디기 토마라 바베 림바데 랑게 르이 타데치 샤양 르베 장와레 시럽 춘유 구두 체센디니 시럽게 삼로바지 시럽게 제바치는 소수기 르이게 바베게 되는 삼다데네 바베오게 샤다 루고디게 바도시네 야와체 도신 제바는 도신 제바체 오레사 데네제 안디 아제 루바 삼다바나 데네 강베 루바 라베 루바 데네 게지 고비 루바스 바야와체 야와체네 아니 되네 아니 주고 나올이야 지게야 동바 디나라 강샤데 되네 여디가 도신 파 심주 되게 제 관계 봐도 체네 내가 닝보 지지여제다 되게 닝보여 봤다 템보여 봐 직비배 약보 예딩 가야 통해 민도아 매바자 닝보 지여제 다니 기네 다바릭 도신 또 소소기 또 시스템기 소소 다니스 소소라는 거 도신 제바 다바 제고래 다바 기스 되네 다바 제바제 되네 다바 제네 도신에 되네 디기 가르팅 거라선 루반 예가체네 관계 봐도 다체신 딜레니보 지여제 다니기네 다바 두스 다바 제네 되네 루들이 닝보 매바인자 델야 아니지 차바기 개와 김자가 민도하세요다 차바기와 김자가 민도하스 두스 제바지도 류리야 닝보 가야 민도하 제가 매바인자 류리야 차바기와에게 배 야보를 제신치네 차바기와에 김자가 민도하세요.
So looking at the whole verse, the whole 63rd verse, here you can see how the two verses run into each other, the 62nd into the 63rd. So we've done the reflection thus far with the scalpel of wisdom, going from the outer surface of the body right down to the very skeletal frame. Now, in the 63rd verse, we go into the skeletal frame, looking within the very bones themselves, right down into the very marrow. And nowhere in any single bone of the bones, because we've separated the various bones, nor in their very marrow, can an essence be found there. There is no basis for attachment to be found anywhere in the body. So this attachment we have for this body, as well as relating to it as being unchanging, there is no essence upon which such a view can be correctly established. Nothing like that can be found.
던다 디네 지가 숨디기 가르tin 거라서네 제상아 저게 랑직 다도 주바 다신 제모바 마리바진 디 네류신 다기와 진제 배직견 탐제단 자와 연된 탐제 직배 야보로 붙이 삼다지 제바진 뒤거래스 제산다 만주기 디네기 풍보들이야 심주 야보 제바 있나 류디 미장외 뇌 안지下达 爸爸呢如果他恰上给错解 되네기 루고게 파두제 디나래야 유마당 안 좁아샤서 차상 뇌제 디가래야 샤로제 디가래야 빠빠주와 샤겨 되네시 미错对吧 지마다 가야 닝보 가야 말에 심신다 진짜 되네시 통해도 두지 심지하고도 어디 루이텔라 되네 닝보 가야 민도 다바 템보다 닝보 가야 민도와 선배게 삼는 코어데 루이텔라 차신기 말이에요 차신 맞지도다 안에 가르치 그래서나 다 루이디 도네 다 샹다지 류 야보 아니 가르여서는 산지 고파 토고도 샘비게 산지 있고 우리 고파 토고도 샘비게 아니 donner 실리고레스 donner 레용레스 진짜 류디를 꽤 마토나 아니 미자와 라신 바 꾀인 바 마토 바이나 델 도르디 류 도르디게 삼바기게 말지 제가 류 도르디 삼바마게나 딜에 야가지 토예게 donner 바기 말와스 제가 꾀인로 토나 델 도르디게 삼바기게 도르디게 삼바기에는 안딜에 야가 류디 아니 토해 도바기 그래 세자 디니디 야오 초도 규버 류디 가라선 산이 구조래 세자 산지 고바 톱나 디니기 구연된 개발진데 토고래 디니자 다 산지 고바 톱이 마톱네 탑민도 셈제 탐지교 단달이야 산지 고바 톱바지기 셈베 삼단제 안된 donner 듬바게 디게네 아는 주게 개와 마게바는 개발제 개바는 뭐 공대공도 펴와지는 냠내 남고 그래서 donner 디스모다 donner 인보리
Summarize the meaning then of these three verses comes down to looking at our body no longer with this confused ignorance that we are so habituated to, but with wisdom, using our wisdom or intelligence to challenge this attachment and to come to a more realistic view of the body. So that was in the first verse we looked at tonight, the 61st verse. Now in the 62nd and 3rd, we take this even deeper. And here we approach it from more of the ultimate perspective, searching throughout the physical body for any essence upon which one could realistically say, yes, it's worthwhile being attached to this body based on this essence, or to see the body as being unchanging based on this essence that I found. But we look with the scalpel of wisdom, and we don't find any such pleasant and desirable essence of the body at all. We recognize there is no wholesome core to be attached to. There is no basis for our attachment. There is no basis for our grasping at permanence. This then shifts our mind, firstly, from the first verse to a more realistic view. Now we come to a view more in accordance with actual reality. Then thirdly, we lift our mind towards the goal that's worthy of striving for, the exalted state of a Buddha, and in particular in relation to these verses, the body of a Buddha, recognizing the many advantages of having a body free of limitation, a body that is the perfect expression of the wish to be of benefit. Recognizing that all beings, myself and all the others, we want to be free of suffering. We want to be free of the results of contaminated karma and afflictions. We want to be free from the all-pervasive suffering of conditionality that keeps us bound in this pain. Recognizing we all want to be free of suffering, we commit to striving to accumulate the causes so that we ourselves can become a Buddha and guide all beings to attain their own freedom from the various ignorances we've discussed here, confused ignorance, and the suffering of being bound in samsara.
망부지 초딩인 들이야 근데 가지고 루이세디 데니치레 차셰 망부실로 초안에 줍되어 버지마도 간래 마되어 줍되현지 매도다 두 삼다는 데니 삼다는 만지기 제마 망반 아니야 지 풍부 라신 마주가 삼다야래 타녀 주고 삼다디 시절마서나 디기 리고레 덴티게 남샤데 레용고레 안디 마제 닝지 섬다웨나 당안주 소수유 류딜이야 미장와다 조바다 기균로 진이 통례도 난 현대 류디 지바라다 지산 현대 류디된 지부지게 인제다 당안은 강안이 반은 콘술레 강안이 지산 콘술 나는 류디 미디반 류딜레 타르제 산계고방 초도기 류 토고가 나신 콘술레 지바레 토고 지바레 스베게 되는 현래 인지게 레라요 보래.
It's really useful to do these meditations because we're in the 5th chapter of this text. Eventually we'll come to the 9th chapter, the chapter on wisdom, whereby, based on the skill you've and the familiarity that you've gained through meditations such as these, it will then be much easier to meditate on dependent arising. Because here we're seeing that this body is dependent on many parts. It's an accumulation or a gathering of, a collection of many parts. It's a dependent arising. It's not independent. So in relation to the teachings you've already had on emptiness, you'll know what I'm referring to here. But by doing these meditations again now, later when that becomes the ultimate reality becomes the focus of the presentation, then the realization of emptiness becomes so much easier. This meditation now aids our later realization of emptiness. And not just our realization of emptiness. When Shantideva in the chapter before comes to the presentation on compassion, this meditation too, if done skillfully, will aid the generation of compassion, because when we come to recognize the actual situation of our own body, as well as our confused ignorant way of relating to it, we recognize, actually, this is not just silly old me. Everyone's like this. Their body is a basis for suffering, yet they're attached to it. They present it as if it's something beautiful. That's a sign of a confused, ignorant mind. And from that comes anger, comes pride. Recognizing how others, like myself, are deluded by their afflictions, then compassion arises for them, as well as their body being a basis for suffering. As long as they are ordinary beings, just as we are, they will also suffer. A further basis for compassion to arise for others.
야, 네, 잘한다.
Then thank you. We can conclude there for tonight. Thank you.